What do you believe right now that's making you feel this way? And when you analyse it, you realise how irrational you can be at times.
Every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
It's not sales per se, but the outcome of it is, because people get to know you, they get to see you.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development programme I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated, yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times. And only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews, and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so, into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer, or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk. Welcome to ScaleUp Radio, where we bring you inspiring stories of innovation and growth. And today we have a special episode featuring Rachael Grimaldi, and she is CEO and founder of CardMedic. And they're a game changer in healthcare communication, in communicating with patients. And CardMedic's app is transforming the way that patients with communication barriers in particular receive their healthcare. It's got pre-written scripts in over 49 languages, easy read options, read aloud features, and sign language videos covering just about anything that a healthcare professional might need to communicate with their patient. And CardMedic therefore ensures inclusivity and helps to reduce health inequities. And Rachael shares her entrepreneurial journey from commercialisation to annual subscriptions with hospitals. She discusses the challenges of innovating within the NHS and navigating funding sources and support like Innovate UK grants and angel investors. And Rachael also emphasises the importance and the value to her of mentorship and effective communication with investors, and also then the growth of her dedicated team. So stay tuned with ScaleUp Radio as she reveals her vision for CardMedic's future, including global expansion and supporting humanitarian causes through the CardMedic Foundation. This is a really inspiring episode, so get ready to have your socks blown off, essentially, with Rachael Grimaldi and the groundbreaking work of CardMedic. Welcome to another episode of ScaleUp Radio. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Rachael Grimaldi, who is the CEO and founder of CardMedic. So, Rachael, welcome to ScaleUp Radio.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I'm really delighted to be here today. It's an amazing opportunity. So, thank you for reaching out.
It's an absolute pleasure. And certainly, I'm really looking forward to hearing all about CardMedic. So tell us, what is CardMedic?
CardMedic is an app that's designed to reduce health inequities and health inequalities that arise from communication barriers in healthcare. So that's commonly a language barrier, but it could be a cognitive problem or sensory impairment, learning disabilities, or literacy issues. So it's an app that's an A to Z or A to Z library of pre-written scripts that replicate common clinical conversations in healthcare. That you can change to, it'll be shortly 49 different languages, right. Easy read, read aloud, and we have some sign language videos as well.
Great. And does the name CardMedic come from the idea of the flashcard sort of type approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was concept to launch in 72 hours. I can tell you a bit more about that side. Really? But yeah, so we were rapidly thinking of a name and a logo and all sorts of things. But the idea came about to sort of have like flashcard style scripts, if you like. So that's partly where the card came from. And the medic, my background is clinical medicine. I'm a senior anaesthetic registrar in the NHS. So and medic also sort of representing wanting to help someone. When you see sometimes car repair companies might be called sort of CardMedic or I don't know, something like that. So it was that sort of combining the two.
Yeah, brilliant. So if I'm a healthcare professional, what does it look like then? What's it going to do for me?
So if you're in whatever healthcare environment you're in, primary care, social, community, pre-hospital, so it could be ambulance, or even we work with an air ambulance, or hospital, acute secondary care. So you could be in any healthcare setting. And if you are faced with a patient with a communication barrier, so let's just take language barrier because that's the most common, and that you're struggling to communicate with them. What you would do is bring CardMedic up on the app, choose, you can either search at the top or you choose the conversation, a topic that you'd like to talk to them about, and then you bring the scripts up and you show it to the patient on the screen, and it just guides that clinical interaction. And we have a whole over 1,000 scripts now, all sorts of specialties and subspecialties, and the library is rapidly growing as well, all contributed to by healthcare and allied healthcare professionals. So you would bring up that conversation, you would change it to the patient's language, and then they would be able to see the questions or explanations and respond back to you as well. So it's really there to guide the interaction and to try and ensure that staff don't have to rely on friends and family to translate, or other healthcare providers or allied healthcare professionals who are busy doing other things, and they're often challenges, including ethical, logistical, etc., of relying on other staff members, or just turning to machine translation, which is what so often happens when there are these big gaps in service provision. Then you don't have the language support there, the interpreters, translators, speech language therapists, learning disability nurses, and so on. So it's really that safety net in your pocket designed to bridge gaps in service provision. And as well, there will be certain standard in healthcare. There are lots of standardized conversations where we do find ourselves saying the same things all the time to patients when we're explaining a procedure or a treatment and so on. There will certainly be examples where, you can use CardMedic instead of needing to phone a translator if it's just something sort of short and not too nuanced. So it could be as simple as a blood test or something, or taking blood. And then... Exactly, or having ECG, or going for a scan, or a little procedure, those sorts of things. Exactly. And from a patient perspective, then it's hard enough with all the worry that's going on and everything else, with some being maybe if we're in hospital, and if we've got a language barrier or there's some other communication barrier, then that just adds to that. So, and is there something as well about, does the patient get something to retain and look over as well? Yeah, that's a great question, and comment as well, because I know I've been clinical for 14 years coming up, and I did graduate medicine, so we were on the shop floor from day 2, so kind of been in the clinical workspace for nearly 18 years, and know from my own experience how frequent it is to work with patients who have communication barriers. And we know through doing CardMedic, we've lost track of the number of people now, members of staff who've said that this group of patients are so often overlooked and underserved. And as you described, when you're in hospital, you're scared, or even just going to your GP, there's always that level of anxiety thrown in, even if you don't have a communication barrier. And so these patients are scared, and they're vulnerable, and they're less likely to engage with healthcare staff and understand the diagnosis or the treatment or the need to comply with medication and so on. Because the healthcare information isn't presented in a format that they understand. So that's definitely something that really resonates with our experience and my clinical experience personally. But with patients being able to have access to the app as well, they're able to look at the scripts in their own time and share it with their family, and they can look in their own language. And that sort of is backed up by a lot of research which shows that as soon as that clinical interaction, like conversation, happens and is finished, the vast majority of information, I think it's about 80+%, is forgotten almost immediately, and then it's a sort of rapid decline in retention of information. So if you add in that, level of anxiety, you're in fight or flight mode, you're scared, and then you don't speak the language, there's little chance of retaining much meaningful information. So that's why it's so important that patients can access that after.
Brilliant. And is there anything else like this?
No, that's a great question. So there's nothing that's doing exactly what we're doing at all. So there are a couple of resources that have kind of short phrase books, if you like, almost like a travel phrase book. If you're going to other countries where you'd have short sentences describing symptoms or those sorts of things, but nothing that combines all of those different communication barriers under one roof. That's all written by healthcare and allied healthcare professionals. These sort of big, very detailed scripts written by people who've been practicing a really, really long time, which, that's so valuable to have that expertise all under one roof. So that's a really exciting part as well, is that we are pretty unique in this space. And
you obviously work for the NHS. Is this a separate business that's set up with a separate ownership, and it has a business model to make money in its own right? So absolutely. So it was never initially intended to be a business. So perhaps if I sort of give you the context, maybe, but it is separate to the NHS, and we are on the NHS Innovation Accelerator, though. So the senior sort of executive team across the NHS really want this to get into everyone's hands and be very successful, because they recognise that health inequities and inequalities are at the core of the Core 20+5 agenda now, with Professor Bola Owolabi really leading the forefront of that. And I really admire her for the work she's doing. And on the Innovation Accelerator, NHS England and the Academic Health Science Networks are really behind that programme and wanting it to, the innovations that go through that to really scale up across the NHS. It's the whole point of the programme. And I'm also on the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme, again, which is trying to retain clinical entrepreneurship and clinicians to remain practicing in the NHS. But it actually started before COVID, when I was on maternity leave and was visiting family abroad when the borders closed and I couldn't get back to work. I would have just gone back and practiced clinically. And I was really desperate to help, and I'd read about a patient who'd been to ITU or intensive care with COVID and couldn't understand staff through PPE, and he described feeling terrified. And he looked like he was probably in his 30s, no communication problems. And I thought, if he's struggling, what about someone who doesn't speak English, or someone who's deaf or has a learning disability, for example? And I spoke to my friends and asked if they were writing notes on paper and how are they coping? And they said, we're a combination of doing that, if you can find pen and paper, or they were shouting at patients or just doing stuff to them without their knowledge or understanding. Right. So we thought, well, there's an acute crisis in communication in healthcare with COVID and PPE, and exacerbating long-standing communication barriers. So there's no obvious scalable solution. So why don't we just create a really simple A to Z library of notes which replicate what you're trying to say in a crisis? That was the initial idea. And it was concept to launch in 72 hours. And then 24 hours later, joined Twitter under the advice of a good friend who's an AME consultant, very active on there. And the word it went viral, no pun intended. And within 3 weeks, we then had 8,000 users in 50 countries. It just spread. And then we were working with the Department for International Trade, who are now Department for Business and Trade. My husband, whose background is digital technology, e-commerce and branding, had built the website, and he's been in business a very long time. And so very much a fusion of his expertise and mine in the beginning, and still we run the business together with a team as well. And so he reached out to the DIT, and they were fantastic and got us immediate coverage, which went global. And the feedback at that point from patients and staff and public and carers was, this has to stay, because this is bridging huge gaps in service provision.
the health outcomes for this group of patients are so much worse, with increased morbidity and mortality. They have more mental health issues, less compliance with medication, they stay longer in hospital, higher rates of readmission, and so on. So that's why it's so important that we get communication right and get it right first time. So that was sort of the ask, and where we found ourselves building out something that initially we had Innovate UK grant funding, and then went on to some accelerators, including the Hill in Oxford, and then 2 in the US, Mass Challenge and Texas Medical Center Innovation Accelerator, as well as the NHS programs. And so we commercialized just under 2 years ago, and we're in 5 ICSs or 20 plus hospitals, and then obviously all the access for all the primary care settings as well in those ICSs, and we're working with an air ambulance as well, and growing. So yeah, it's been a whirlwind 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely whirlwind, and I know you've also won a lot of awards. I think you were a winner at the Great British Entrepreneurial Awards, for example, weren't you? And
that was amazing. Yeah, real honour. Yeah, absolutely. We've been really lucky. Yeah, we've managed to pick up a lot of awards along the way, which is it's always really special winning awards, because it's, you put a lot of blood, sweat and tears and effort into this, and of course it's not for the accolades or the awards, but the fact that it gets recognized, that we are on a mission to reduce health inequalities globally and make a positive social impact, and these awards really recognize our mission and what we're trying to do to better healthcare experiences and engagement for patients who otherwise find it really challenging and who are underserved. So yeah, it's really lovely. It's really special to win awards, and people, have taken the time and effort to nominate us, or, judge the awards against some incredible candidates out there, So I'm always very surprised when we win something, because there's so many incredible innovations out there. So it's always amazing to win an award.
Great. So you mentioned that you commercialized sort of two years ago. So how does the money flow? How does the business make money?
Yeah, so we sell enterprise level annual subscriptions to hospitals. So they buy a license for CardMedic, and then it's unlimited users on unlimited devices in any healthcare setting that falls in that branch. Okay,
so that's and there's a free version as well, isn't there? I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a free version that you can download from the App Store. So it's a mobile app and a web app. So you can get it from Apple or Android, and then you can also access via the web app. And the free version has just got some limited content that's designed to get you out of a difficult situation in an emergency scenario, so some more emergency-based scripts, but sort of just touching on the commercial aspect of what we do. But in line with our vision, we want in the future to be supporting. We've already supported humanitarian crises and work with refugees through an amazing organisation called Step Up One to do some of our translation work and so on. But what we really want to do in the future is be able to fund training for community health workers in refugee camps, and provide grants for female entrepreneurs in healthcare entrepreneurs in developing countries and so on. So that's a huge part of our mission. So whilst we want this to be commercially, of course, successful, we want it to really reach as many patients as possible, not just across the UK and in the US, where we're already working with hospitals in the US, but beyond, globally.
Great. And you mentioned that the outcomes are difficult for this group of patients. Have you been able to track then any improvement in those outcomes as a result of people using CardMedic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's really, we're working with academic health science networks on this, because measuring a reduction in health inequalities and equating that to something quantitative is really tricky to unpick, especially when you're looking at communication. So Professor Bola Olabi put out a report recently with the HFMA, I think it was called, around the business case for health inequalities. So that's really outlining the importance of reducing health inequalities and the fact that there's a financial benefit to it for institutions. And then there's, of course, the legislative side. But actually unpicking, when you look at a whole patient journey and how many times they're communicated with and so on, where CardMedic is used in that journey, how we might reduce healthcare inequalities and how that then equates to financial savings is tricky to unpick. But what we are looking at is improving efficiency, reducing translation spend, and so on. And what we did actually was a study at the start of the pandemic with University Hospital Sussex and the University of Brighton to look at patient confidence and understanding staff through PPE when CardMedic was used, and we showed a 28% increase up to 95%. So significant increase in patient confidence, and we're looking at working with one of the AHSNs around doing a real world evaluation study as well around the efficacy of CardMedic as well. So that's underway at the moment, the planning for that. So yeah, it's a tricky one to unpick, and I have, I've asked lots of kind of senior leaders in the NHS their perspectives on it, and it aligns that it's not an easy one to pin your hat on, so to speak, to show an X% reduction in risk of Y or Z, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. And I'd love to, I don't think we've had anybody on before who has set up a business from within the NHS. So I'd love to explore how that aspect of it and how the NHS Innovation Accelerator works, for example. I've heard of it, but not really got any in-depth knowledge of it. So how does that work? How do you go about getting them on board and setting something up within the NHS?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme was the first one I was on, and that's a brilliant programme. But when I joined it, I'd done the Hill Accelerator before that, which is based at Oxford University Hospitals, and that has a range of clinicians on it, but also people who aren't clinical at all, but are wanting to fast track kind of innovation to the front line of the NHS. So that's designed as a market access accelerator. So that's sort of a mix of clinicians and non-clinicians. And from there, I went to the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme, and that was set up because clinicians in the NHS were trying to innovate from within the NHS and were struggling because it's really difficult to innovate from the inside for a lot of reasons that I can't sort of profess to know all of them, but it is complicated, not least of all because you're just trying to get on and do the day job.
Yes, you haven't exactly got a lot of free time, have you?
Else. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there are lots of challenges around innovating, and the story goes, and I'm sure Professor Tony Young, who runs the programme with Anglia Ruskin University, would tell it better than I would. But one of his colleagues, I think it was possibly one of his trainees, apologies Tony if I'm getting this wrong, was wanting to innovate from within the NHS and was being stifled somewhat and wanted to leave, and he strongly believed that we should be retaining clinicians, and because we're on the front line, we are perfectly positioned to see the challenges, the pain points, what works well, what doesn't work well, and really understand from the inside out where our innovations fit, and not just to come up with solutions looking for problems, but we know what the problems are because we work with them every day and that we've come up with a solution for it. So his idea was that we should be fostering this in terms of providing mentorship, providing business skills, providing training around pitching decks, financial models, writing business cases, networking, etc., etc., etc. So he set up the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme quite a few years back, maybe 7 years ago, something like that. Sorry again if I haven't got this exactly right.
Not so long ago.
Not so long ago. No, it may be a bit more than that, but not that long ago. And I believe there's now maybe around 1,000 clinical entrepreneurs on the programme, and ranging from healthcare professionals, allied healthcare professionals, to people in HR. So basically anyone that works within the NHS now. It was originally clinicians, and now it's really just branched out to anyone who works in the NHS. And there's some incredible innovations on there. And they're retaining so many clinicians now through the support of that program. And when I first started CardMedic, and it was a pandemic and I was stuck abroad and I didn't know anyone that had innovated in the NHS before, and it felt very lonely. And I remember it was one of the pieces of media coverage we'd had, someone got in touch with me who was a social worker, and her son was studying medicine in Oxford, and she connected us and I had a chat, and he was the one that told me about these programs that were out there, and that's sort of how I found out about it. And I remember when I joined, feeling, and everyone says the same thing when they join, feeling like you found your tribe, because suddenly here you are on this lonely journey, surrounded by people who are clinical entrepreneurs or healthcare entrepreneurs, and you recognize the journey that each other's on, and there's so much camaraderie and support and networking and collaboration. It's such a powerful program. And there's been loads of partnerships that have formed as a result, and all sorts. So then the NHS Innovation Accelerator is designed, they're a much smaller cohort. Again, they've been going probably a similar number of years, but might need to fact check. And I'm one of 17 companies this year, and they're really looking for people that are scaling up across the NHS. And a number of us have been on the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme or Digital Health.London or various other accelerators. There's a digital health ecosystem that you find that you often paths cross, and you've been on similar programs to each other. So they select a smaller cohort of companies to go on it. It's a really rigorous process actually to get on it. They do a lot of due diligence, and they involve patient representatives and people from academic health science networks and clinicians in hospitals and so on. So it's an application and an interview and further due diligence. So it's a tough program to get on, but it's absolutely brilliant. And we're doing quarterly reviews with them, and the support and mentorship is fantastic. So I went up, I think it was last week, saw them in person for one of the sessions we had with Green at NHS England, which was really interesting, and then got another one next month and so on. So the support is amazing. And again, you're in a room with a lot of clinicians. Not everyone is clinical in there, but everyone is scaling across the NHS. So again, fantastic program to be on.
Great. And is that all? Do you have to pay for that? Do they take equity investment?
No.
Is there no,
nothing. They just want to see innovation fast track to the front line that they believe should be across the entire NHS, in everybody's hands. So yeah, no, you don't have to at all, which is fantastic.
Very good. And have you had to take on any investors within the business? I mean, you've it sounds like your husband was certainly developing originally with the website and the app. Have you had to take on any other investment to develop it out further, or what?
Yeah, definitely. It's to do what we do to this degree and depth and detail is very expensive. What we want in the front end is something that looks really simple and intuitive, and you can just pick it up and run with it. But in the back end, it is really complicated and complex and multifaceted, and involves lots of management systems and so on. And so initially we had Innovate UK grant funding. We didn't have to, we applied for it. It was we were really lucky to win it, actually. It was the de minimis grant, which was I'd never applied for a grant before, but it turns out was at that time was apparently their most competitive grant that they'd ever had, which made sense because it was so complicated to apply for. But we were honestly over the moon when we got it, and we sort of saw it as a sign that we had to continue with this, because it was very rapidly reaching the point that it was going to be untenable if we were going to respond to the global feedback of people wanting this product without any sort of funding, and being in a global pandemic where the world was shut down, because we launched April 1st and, we'd come up with the idea March 28th and had only just gone into, lockdown. Well, in the States, it was a bit behind times for the UK, where they weren't quite aligned. The UK had just gone into lockdown, 2 weeks before. So we got some Innovate UK grant funding, and then we got a follow-on grant. And then because of the mission and what the app does and how it supports staff communicating with patients, and all the benefits the way the app grew rapidly, we attracted a lot of interest from angels, 60% of whom were clinicians, who said, I just really want to support this and contribute. So we ended up doing an angel round, and we're now doing a seed round. We have a lead VC investor in the US. They're based in Houston, Texas. And we are looking to close our seed round. So anyone that's interested to get involved, because we're at a really exciting inflection point. We've had 100% renewal rates so far, and we are scaling rapidly across the NHS, and also in the US. We've got a hospital that have renewed with us, and others that we're speaking to, big healthcare systems in the pipeline. So we're at a fantastic point in terms of growing and scaling. And also we have EIS available as well. So for UK investors, that's really attractive for angel groups as well. So if there's anyone kind of in your network that listens to this that might be interested in getting involved in, really exciting sort of social impact startup, not startup, scale up now across the NHS, then I'd love them to get in touch.
Absolutely. Well, we'll include the contact details at the end and in the show notes then for
thank you.
Definitely, and we'll see what we can do to help with that. So, and what have you learned then about raising funds and working with investors?
A lot, given that, I've never done it before this. It's a tricky time at the moment. Fundraising it's a full-time job. I remember being told that at the beginning and thinking, okay, no, I get that, makes sense, but it'll have to just slot in to everything else, because you're juggling a lot when you're a relatively small team and a fast-growing business. But it really is a full-time job. So that is true. And we have an incredible venture partner mentor in the States called Blake, who is supporting us with our investment raise, and he's absolutely fantastic. He's been there and done it many times before himself. He really is an expert in the field and providing invaluable advice. So I think having some mentorship in that space and support and guidance is really important. And also to say that even if you don't have the knowledge in the area, follow your gut, because people will come out of the woodwork who want to invest, who maybe aren't always sound, and it sounds a bit too good to be true, in which case it probably is. So I think there's, that when you're navigating as well is be true to yourself and listen to your gut. And, it is true that when you've got investment, it is a long-term relationship. People describe it to a marriage of sorts, and, and it is. So I think ensuring that you get along with your investors and have a good line of communication is really important. And, our investors are a really lovely team of people. They're really open and want to communicate and work closely with us. So, we meet with them every week, and I've had a lot of support from them. So I think it's really important to ensure that you choose, or you choose them as much as they choose you, in a way.
Good, excellent advice. And how have you gone about establishing how much equity to give away, essentially for the investment? So essentially, how have you put a value on the business?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So again, I'm not an expert at all. So short answer is our investors gave us a valuation that they felt was fair and that we agreed with. When we were creating what we thought was our own valuation, we had a spreadsheet and we had lots of different categories in there around not just looking at what revenue we had, but looking, bringing into the mix all sorts of other aspects, including how many users, awards, content, all those sorts of things, anything proprietary that we had, and so on, because all of those feed into valuation, and then spit a number out at the end, and then you end up sort of meeting somewhere in the middle. Since that valuation was set, we have grown massively. So valuation, will have increased by now, but we haven't done a new valuation yet. So I think it's there's no sort of super black and white answer about it. And I remember asking a lot of different people who were investors and mentors and various people on these accelerators, how do you value a business and what goes into it? And there are formulae out there around, multiples of revenue and size of the business and so on. And I think when you get to a certain size, it's probably more straightforward. And I think if you're a SaaS, B2B SaaS, that has a certain adds something to the valuation versus B2C versus, other types of businesses will also impact how you're valued. And whether you're a tech, digital tech business or AI, they'll all have their own sort of multiples of how they impact your valuation. But I think when you're a startup, it is tricky to place value on your business when you're pre-revenue, or just, bringing some revenue in, even if it's tiny. So some of that valuation also goes into your team. We have a super experienced team behind what we're doing, which is really exciting. And I think that feeds into the valuation as well. So it's a tricky path to navigate. So I think it's a conversation with, if you're taking on investments, a conversation with your investors as well, because ultimately they're probably the ones that will call the shots in the end, I imagine.
And you mentioned your team, and so how big is your team now? What sort of stage have you got to with team members?
So we've got between sort of 6 and 7 full-time equivalent across UK and US. So we've got more than that, but combined, that's the full-time equivalent. And we've got an amazing group of volunteers as well, of speech language therapists and learning disability nurses, and so on. And we work with professional translators who volunteer, or we used to volunteer. We pay them now, and refugees as well, as I mentioned, and so on. So a big team behind it, but the sort of core group day to day is a relatively small team, but growing. We've just brought on another team member last week, which is really exciting, another doctor in the team.
Great. I'm dying to know how you actually managed to do this. You've got a full-time job as an anaesthetist within the NHS, and you're running this business as well. I mean, how on earth, and you've got a family of 4 children, you were saying to me before we went on air, how on earth do you manage to keep control of things and find enough hours in the day?
Yeah, it's tricky. Well, thankfully, my anaesthetic training is part-time. So I'm 60%, which is 2 days a week. And there's a lot of really important reasons why I practice clinically, not least of all, I really love it. It was obviously pre-business, was my passion and my dream from when I was a child, so to be a doctor. And so there's that aspect to it. But actually, there's the networking, keeping up to date. And when I speak to hospitals, I've been doing site visits this week and last week, speaking to some incredible teams of midwives at hospitals all across London, and we've been going to Manchester and so on. And I think when I speak to them as a colleague, as a fellow practicing clinician, it carries so much weight, because I understand exactly what they're going through that day on the shop floor, because I do it too. And I think to engage my colleagues who will be using this, it's so important to stay in that, to maintain my clinical practice for that reason as well. So yeah, juggling it's tricky. It is tricky, and we have to be really disciplined with our time, and learn to say no to things, because again, especially in the very early days, I thought it was super important to say yes to every single opportunity, which I think it is, when you're starting out, because building that network is crucial. But there comes a point when, as much as I would love to have meeting after meeting after meeting and meet people, there's no time in between to do the stuff, the outputs of those meetings. And if they're not really laser focused on what our outcomes are going to be, then, unfortunately, I have to just juggle my time. So I can't spread myself so thinly that I attend everything, for example. So really, a couple of years ago, it just, was clear that we needed to be super structured with our time. And I think that's why growing the team and bringing on people to do different roles is really, really important. So, there'll always be that element when you're in this inflection point of having a busy team where everyone's wearing multiple hats, because that's just the nature of it before you get really big. But everyone does have their role, and so I think it's just about being disciplined, and then taking weekends off, because weekdays are really difficult, but weekends are family time. So yeah, I think it's it's a juggle. Life is a juggle, but everyone that as everyone has their own things that they're busy with, whether or not you have children, whether or not you're working, everyone's, most people have busy lives and lots to juggle.
Yeah. And how do you manage the team? How do you make sure they're working on the right things?
Yeah, so we have different sort of techniques. So Tim, my husband's managing director, and he's really experienced. So he's very used to working with various different boards with tickets on them, and sort of everyone has their own to-do list. So lots of different techniques, but ultimately the most important thing is we trust our team, and they're all really experienced in their own right, and everyone's a grown up, so people can we want people to feel very autonomous. We don't want to micromanage people at all, so we trust them to make their own decisions, but we ensure that we have weekly meetings as a team.
Okay.
We do work off virtually, and partly that's because our footprint isn't huge. We're not spread out over the whole of the UK. It just happened to work out this way, but we do believe in sustainability and not doing too much traveling, so but we do have occasional group meetups as well, but we have our weekly team meetings, and then various team members will touch base every day do sort of daily 10-minute stand-ups, and then we have our own system of reporting where everyone has visibility of what everyone else is working on, and we have our own boards where we manage our own to-do lists and stuff like that, but you can see each other's boards and see what everyone else is up to, but Tim has overall visibility of what everyone's doing, so he's very structured, along with the other team members who've come on, who are again really experienced and have created some amazing structure around what we're doing, and really professionalized it in the last couple of years.
Great. So what have you learned then over the time? You've been on a rapid journey already. What are some of the key things looking back on it that you think, yeah, we maybe we got that right, or maybe we didn't get that one right? What sort of things have you learned, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the beginning, and there's still lots I'm learning, of course, but I think in the beginning, we just wanted something just had to be done. We just wanted to get something out there. We'd done no prep, no reading, no looking at the market, because it wasn't intended to be a business. It was just intended to support my friends communicate through PPE. So it was that feeling of just, I don't think we slept for 3 days when we were building it. It was just get something out there, just launch, just do it, just share it, and hopefully that will help. So I think, and then of course with COVID, a lot of doors opened because we had people contribute, thousands and thousands of pounds of free translation work, and all sorts of plugins for the website, and app. We had an app built in 10 days, and all sorts of stuff. So I think it was a combination of just sort of that slightly scrappy feel of entrepreneurship and startup, and just get it done, just get something out there. And I think that worked because we didn't overthink it. We just wanted to do something. But then on the flip side, I'm a very organized person, and I would have spent, if I'd have known I was going to set up a business, I would have spent months planning it, and, organizing my folders on my computer, and doing some research, and writing a business case, and all sorts. And actually, in retrospect, I don't think we needed to do that in the beginning at all. So I don't feel like that was a mistake in any way. We got where we got so quickly because we suddenly came up with a solution and met an acute problem. But it actually turns out that that's a massively chronic problem. So I think, I guess the sort of lesson from that is, in a way, if you've got an idea, there are those two aspects of it. One is to be a bit prepared, but the other is don't let that stifle you to the point where you don't actually start.
Yeah.
So, no one way is perfect or right or wrong over the other. And I'm sure, people, there's very technical and professional ways of doing this through, I suppose, MBA programs and all sorts. You must learn about these sorts of things. But, coming at it from someone who's not been through that route, but who saw an acute problem and came up with Tim and myself with a solution, that it's, again, I think that's another thing that we've learned is ensure that your solution meets a problem, not the other way around, that you've got a solution just looking for a problem, and that you're really listening to your customers and getting their feedback is really important. And I think engaging, because that's how we're growing so quickly, is because what we're doing really resonates with our customers and our clients, and we care passionately about the same things as them, and we really want to work with them to ensure that we've got the right content and so on. So yeah, I think that's really been important, as well as to listen. And again, in the beginning, we were thinking, yeah, we can do this and we can do that, and there's tons that's in our roadmap. We've got a really exciting roadmap ahead. But again, it's about learning that, you can't do everything at once, and it is really expensive. So about developing a roadmap, and then you can plan for these things.
Yeah, excellent. And what do you think some of the key things are that you got out of the accelerators that you've been on? How have they helped you?
I think in a variety of ways. The mentorship has been amazing, right. And the networking. I think those are two really important aspects of the programs. And I think the hill where I started really took me from being a clinician with no business knowledge at all to someone that understood some of the lingo, could pitch to investors. It really gave me confidence. And like many people, I have imposter syndrome, and it is, it's super common. I think it's a third of people, more in women than men, I believe. But it really just helps address that in many ways, and give me some confidence around what I was doing. And then in the other accelerators, it's just really built on that platform of some amazing sessions around understanding procurement in the NHS, and value proposition, and business case, and health economics, and return on investment calculators. So we've built our own ROI calculator now for our clients or prospective clients, and so on. Okay. So I think all of those aspects of not just sort of setting up and running a business, but actually doing that in healthcare, and specifically in the NHS. And again, we did this in the US, and Texas Medical Center and Mass Challenge, about really understanding the go-to-market strategy for those for the UK, US, market segmentation, value proposition, and understanding how the different healthcare systems work. Yeah. But so yeah, I think there's that sort of more educational side to it, and then there's more the mentorship and the networking side. So I'd highly recommend them to anyone that has an idea, because some of them take really early stage. You've got an idea and you have no idea what to do with it. You don't have a team, because through them you could meet your co-founder, for example, or you could get introductions to investors and so on, and other things, teaching you around legals or insurance and stuff that you wouldn't, accountancy, that sort of stuff. Making connections in those spaces for you that you wouldn't otherwise know where to begin. So yeah, I think if you're someone with an idea, even if it's just an idea, these programs could still be for you. The Clinical Entrepreneur Program, I think the Hill might, again, they might correct me if I'm wrong, sorry, the Hill, but they might have split it into a really early stage cohort now, and some ones that are a little bit later. But again, Entrepreneur Program supports people at different stages as well. So it's really worth researching. And again, there might be someone who's doing the same or really similar thing to you that you could end up collaborating rather than competing with as well, which I am a great believer in collaboration. Yeah,
absolutely. Good. And so what if anything, would you have done differently given it over again? Would there be anything you do differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, I think just purely because of my organizational nature, I think I would have wanted to have spent some time planning. I think that would be the main thing, just being a bit more prepared, physically, like, organizing my space and my computer and doing some research, but mentally prepared for what has felt like riding on a speeding bullet train and just grabbing stuff as I go, which has, become more formalized and organized over the last couple of years as the team has grown. But very much in the early days, just, was, a couple of hours sleep a night for months and months and months and months and months on end. so yeah, I think just having some mental prep, of like, okay, prepare yourself because this is what you're about to head into. I don't know if that would have helped or not, but just maybe it would have been nice to know. But then, again, sometimes what you don't know is better because you just have to get on with it.
Yeah, you've just made me smile with the speeding bullet train, because I think somebody's described growing a scaling business as riding with a bullet train and laying the trackers in front of you as you go. It's like...
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. 100%. Yeah. That's right. Well, hopefully we're doing it right then.
Good. Yeah,
we've got that analogy right.
So you've already hinted at it, but what's the legacy that you want to leave?
But for us as a team, I think it's the CardMedic Foundation, and CardMedic itself is being able to reduce health inequities globally, because we fundamentally believe it doesn't matter what your background is or your ability to communicate, your outcomes should be the same. And I really, through the foundation, being able to support humanitarian crises and refugees and female entrepreneurs and healthcare entrepreneurs in developing countries, and so on. We have a lot of ideas around how that will grow. I would love that to be the legacy. And then, of course, I would love it to be wildly successful, because then that means that we have reached as many staff and patients as possible. And I would love us to be used, as the NHS Innovation Accelerator wants us to be, and the Clinical Entrepreneur Programme, I would love us to be used widely across the NHS, ideally in every ICS in the country. And we're made a good chunk of the way there. They've only been established just over a year, these integrated care systems, and we're already in 5 of them out of 42. So that's pretty good going for the fact that they've only just been established really relatively recently. So I think that would be the ambition and the legacy. So
where do you want to be in 5 years' time then? What's the goal?
That's a great question. I think ultimately we want to have scaled across the NHS, so to be in the vast majority of ICSs, if not all of them. I know that's ambitious, but not impossible at all. And then really growing and scaling in the US, and that is, there's lots of ideas, lots in our roadmap, lots in our pipeline, which is super exciting and has massive potential with what we're doing. And so in 5 years' time, it depends on, the roadmap and how that develops. But I can really see us, scaling massively across UK and US, and then focusing, on other markets as well. But that's the vision.
Good. No, fantastic. It's been absolutely fascinating. Nearly the end, but are you all right for a couple of quick fire questions just to wrap up with? Super. So if you could go back to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, that's a good one. I've not been asked that before. So I've always been a planner, and I've always wanted to know, be organised and on top of it and what's going to happen. And I think the pandemic massively pulled the rug out from everyone. And so to say to my younger self, there's only so much you can plan and it will be all right. If it doesn't, like the pandemic, life did not go to plan, but somehow we're still here and we're thriving and life has taken a different path.
Brilliant. Any books or podcasts or other resources that you found really useful that you'd recommend to other entrepreneurs?
The podcasts I listen to are just so I can switch my brain off, so they're probably not entrepreneurial at all. I actually really just enjoy Armchair Expert, because it's sorry because it's not super entrepreneurial in the slightest, but I just find it really interesting because he's a celebrity, but is an actor, writer, director, I think, and has conversations not just with other celebrities, but with he has experts on experts, so all sorts of different people, and goes quite deep into talking about psychology and human behavior and shared experiences. So I just find that A, really interesting, but B, a great way to sort of zone out for a little bit as well.
Brilliant. Good. What are the key apps that you've got on your phone that you use most often?
Well, of course, CardMedic. But yeah, I use WhatsApp a lot for work mostly, and keep in touch with family, and up to date with bits and pieces for the school. My emails I'm on a lot, and the news, nothing really exciting. Not really on social media. LinkedIn I use a lot.
Great.
Yeah, that's been a massive resource. Been so helpful being on LinkedIn.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
Who would you say has had the most influence on you as a leader?
Oh, as a leader, interesting one. I mean, my husband and I have been together 22 years this summer, and he's always done business and I've done medicine, and I've learned a lot from him. So in terms of leading a business, running a business together, we work really well together. And so I wouldn't say he's influenced me. I'd say we're a great partnership and a great team, and we lean into each other's strengths. But on this journey of, if I think business leader, I really admire the way Professor Bola Owolabi runs things. I think what she does is amazing. I think what Professor Tony Young does is brilliant with the Clinical Entrepreneur Program, and Conrad with the Innovation Accelerator as well. And Liz Ashall-Payne was one of my mentors, and she runs Orca Health, and she's a speech and language therapist by background. And I find her really inspiring because, again, she came at it from not a business background. So I think a few people on the journey, all who have sort of, and there are many more that I would love to mention, but just everyone sort of brings different elements and teaches you different things.
Excellent.
Along the way. Great.
And how do you find your customers, your new customers? Is that all through word of mouth, or what's the most successful way for finding new enterprise clients, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, but basically everyone's come to us so far, which is brilliant, because it spreads by podcasts, webinars, magazine, TV, radio, all those sorts of things. Brought it together. But presenting at national forums, I was presenting at NHS Confed week before last, just after Steve Barclay, who's our Health and Social Care Secretary for State. And those sorts of forums, people just hear about us through clinical networks we present at, and so on. And LinkedIn, people see a lot of what we're up to, and word of mouth. I think people really, when they know it's in the NHS, by the NHS, for the NHS, that sort of thing, that's a real stamp of approval. When they know it's clinical entrepreneurship from within, it's a relatively small ecosystem, and you trust what your colleagues say, because if they're using it and they see value from what you're doing, then they're likely to tell colleagues within their network, and the word spreads. So that's not to say that we're resting on our laurels waiting for people to come knocking on the door, anything but that's very much how we've grown so quickly.
Excellent. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's been absolutely fascinating and full of great advice. So thank you very much, Rachael, for being my guest today. If people would like to get hold of you, find out more about CardMedic, whether that be from the investment round or from another aspect, what's the best way for them to do that?
Thank you. Well, we're on, our website is just cardmedic.com. We're also on Twitter at CardMedic, and we're on LinkedIn as CardMedic. And of course, I would be delighted if people wanted to reach out to me. The only thing I say is that my name is spelled slightly differently. So it's Rachael, as Rachel. People often misspell it. And then Grimaldi, Grimaldi. So if you look me up on LinkedIn and drop me a note, I'd be delighted to touch base over email from there. And we have a contact us page on the website as well, if you wanted to, or even if you downloaded the free app from the App Store, you can contact us through the app as well. Brilliant.
Been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and I wish you all the best. I shall certainly keep an eye out and look forward to seeing your continued success. So thank you very much for being my guest today, Rachael.
Oh, thank you for your kind words. I really love being on it, and really, really appreciate your time.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.